to classical music, reading astronomy, playing chess, and buying stocks. Bill Mumy gave him the nickname the Comb because Williams groomed himself constantly between takes, a man turning restless energy into something harmless. In one reported exchange with Harris, Williams erupted, "God damn it, I will kill you, Harris," before adding after a pause, "I mean Smith," whether accidental or deliberate. It captured something completely real about the situation. After cancellation, Williams discovered his Hollywood career had not survived being the background of his own show. Then he found that halfway around the world, his situation was entirely reversed. Zorro had become a cultural institution in Argentina. The government gave him a luxury marina apartment. The wife of President Perón personally invited him to perform at a charity event. He spent the last 21 years of his life living as something close to royalty in a country that had never forgotten what he meant to them. On May 6, 1989, police entered his Buenos Aires apartment after friends reported his disappearance and found him alone. A ruptured brain aneurysm had killed him approximately a week earlier. He was 65. Nobody had known because he had been living alone and mobile phones did not yet exist. The man promised the lead of a television series had died undiscovered in a country that loved him more than his own industry ever had. Bill Mumy later said, simply, when the show ended, he never saw Guy again. Not once. Every child who watched Lost in Space in the 1960s loved the robot. It waved its accordion arms, barked warnings, and somehow managed to feel warm despite being made entirely of metal and rubber. For 3 years, the person physically inside that machine was suffering in ways the production company had quietly decided were not anyone else's concern. Bob May walked into the Lost in Space audition by accident while applying for a different job at 20th Century Fox. Irwin Allen's team sent him to try on the robot suit. The audition was brutally simple. If you fit, you are hired. When May climbed out of the suit after his first session inside, he was cut and bleeding from the metal edges. He took the job anyway. The suit weighed approximately 200 pounds. Under studio lights, the interior temperature became what May later described as his own jacuzzi and sauna combined. The costume was nearly airtight. On at least 2 confirmed occasions across the 3 seasons, May passed out inside it from lack of oxygen. His eyes rolled back, and he went limp before crew members realized something was wrong. The production company's official response to these incidents was that there was no time to stop filming. Despite performing every physical gesture that made the robot one of television's most beloved characters, Bob May was never credited on screen during the entire original run. Not one episode in all 3 seasons carried his name. The practical consequence was lower pay and significantly reduced residuals. As Lost in Space grew into a global phenomenon, generating licensing income across decades, May and his wife Judith were living in a mobile home park in the San Fernando Valley. In November 2008, the Sayre fire destroyed their home. 2 months later, May died of congestive heart failure at 69. What defined his later years was not bitterness, but extraordinary generosity. He became one of the most beloved figures on the science fiction convention circuit, staying at signing tables until every fan had their moment. He said once, "I will stay at any convention signing autographs until the last fan is finished or the cleaning crew forces me to leave." A man made invisible by the industry that profited from him chose to make sure that no fan ever felt invisible in front of him. The original Lost in Space pilot, titled No Place to Hide, was filmed in late 1964 on a budget of approximately $600,000, making it the most expensive television pilot ever produced at that time. The story was clean and entirely serious. A family called the Robinsons launched toward Alpha Centauri, were knocked off course by a meteor storm and landed on an alien planet where they had to survive. Both Robinson parents held doctorates. The children were prodigies. There was no villain, no comedy, no robot, no internal conflict. It played like a genuine film. When Allen screened it for CBS executives, they bought the series immediately. Then they handed him a list of demands. The pilot was too hardware-driven. They wanted a recurring antagonist who could generate weekly conflict. Allen suggested Ming the Merciless. His story editor pushed for something closer to Long John Silver. They settled on Dr. Zachary Smith. CBS also required a robot. The ship was redesigned. The original Sirius pilot was locked in a storage vault. Two facts about the final show rarely get mentioned. The Jupiter 2 interior set cost $350,000, making it the most expensive standing television set of its era, more costly than the entire Enterprise bridge on Star Trek. And the theme music was composed by a 24-year-old named Johnny Williams, who later became John Williams and wrote the scores for Star Wars, Jaws, and Indiana Jones. The rivalry between Lost in Space and Star Trek is one of the most misunderstood stories in television history. In raw ratings, it was not close. Lost in Space consistently placed between 32nd and 35th in the weekly Nielsen rankings. Star Trek never climbed higher than approximately 52nd during its entire original run. The show, remembered today as the pinnacle of 60s science fiction, was losing the ratings war every single week it aired. The rivalry began before either show existed. Gene Roddenberry pitched Star Trek to CBS in a 2-hour meeting. One executive questioned him closely about his production plans, and the reason for that detailed interest was that CBS was already developing Lost in Space and had no intention of buying a competing science fiction property. CBS. No. Roddenberry took Star Trek to NBC. Both shows then spent 3 seasons competing for the same audience without ever occupying the same time slot. The most genuinely funny artifact of this rivalry happened during Season 3, when the Lost in Space makeup team needed to create a pointy-eared alien boy and found themselves short on time and budget. Their solution was to borrow the actual molds used to make Spock's ears from the Star Trek production, paint them a different color, and apply them to their own alien character. Devoted Star Trek fans immediately recognized the ears and accused Lost in Space of plagiarism. The actual explanation was entirely mundane. Makeup artists from both productions were close friends who regularly shared resources to survive impossible deadlines. Inside the Jupiter 2, a completely unexpected love story was unfolding. Angela Cartwright was 13 when filming began. Bill Mumy was 10. They went through their entire adolescence together on that set, tutored together at Fox's studio school, eating lunch together, running lines together. Mumy described it later with characteristic directness. We were each other's first true love. They were briefly engaged in the early 70s before ending the relationship quietly and without bitterness. What nobody predicted was what came next. For more than 50 years, they remained genuinely close friends, co-authoring multiple books, appearing at conventions together, and as recently as March 2026 being photographed laughing together with Marta Kristen. Then there was Mumy's other secret. While spending his working days fighting alien monsters for Lost in Space, he was going home every evening and watching Star Trek with devoted enthusiasm. He was, in his own words, a committed Trekkie through the entire run of the show that was supposedly Star Trek's rival. Decades later, he made it official by appearing in a Star Trek Deep Space Nine episode where his character dies in combat. The producer reportedly got a considerable kick out of killing Will Robinson. The rivalry dissolved in a detail so strange it sounds invented. Irwin Allen died on November 2nd, 1991. Gene Roddenberry had died 9 days earlier on October 24th. The two creators who had spent their careers competing over the same corner of the American imagination left this world within the same 2-week window. The end of Lost in Space is one of the most instructive stories in the history of how television treats the people who make it. The show ran for 83 episodes across 3 seasons. It never received a finale. The Robinson family was never rescued. They never reached Alpha Centauri. They never came home. The last episode filmed ended with the family still stranded on a distant planet, fully believing they were returning in 8 weeks for a season, for that was never going to happen. The cancellation came down to a negotiation that Irwin Allen refused to lose. CBS offered a 4th season with a 15% budget cut. Allen said no. Jonathan Harris later told this story with a mixture of admiration for Allen's pride and frustration at the consequence. The show was canceled not because audiences stopped watching, but because the producer refused to accept less money. CBS announced the decision on February 19, 1968. June Lockhart read it in her morning newspaper. Marta Kristen received a phone call and described herself as speechless. Bill Mumy cried, "No wrap party, no farewell, no handshake from the network." The episode that stands as the purest symbol of Lost in Space's creative collapse aired during the final season and was called The Great Vegetable Rebellion. In it, Dr. Smith picks a flower on an alien planet and is put on trial by a sentient plant creature, then transformed into a stalk of celery. The central villain was a man in a full-body foam rubber carrot costume. The writer arrived at Jonathan Harris's dressing room holding the script behind his back, too embarrassed to hand it over directly. Guy Williams and June Lockhart could not get through their scenes without laughing. Irwin Allen was so furious that he wrote both of them out of the next 2 episodes at full salary as punishment for laughing at his own show. Then something stranger happened. When TV Guide published its list of the 100 greatest television episodes in 1997, The Great Vegetable Rebellion